One warning, you should not be doing the right thing if you don't interact with universities or where new ideas, new innovations are being generated. All the industries should be interacting with the universities, not necessarily Cochin University. You can go anywhere, but probably that is one of the primary conditions you should be focusing right now. Thank you.
Chair, speakers, and delegates, ladies and gentlemen. A major objective of this conference is to sustain the achievements, advance it, and, if possible, replicate at the national level in India. And in fact, what we have been talked about by the learned speakers, I've taken cue from them and observed certain aspects contributing to that objective. In fact, it's the physical performance monitoring of the units with a prime focus on production, financial, and environmental safety aspects that as a single most factor contributed to the resurgence of state-level enterprises in Kerala. Actually, it's a review of the memorandum of understanding, and in this case, we do not have an MOU on paper available. Still, it was a review of that, what are the undertakings by both the parties involved. Monitoring with authority is something that is definitely getting into the intervening in the operations of the unit, and it's not bad. Deliberate interventions in the operations of the units are welcome. I don't see that there's a golden rule that such kind of interventions will lead to complications or trouble. It is the monitoring sessions, both parties undertake certain aspects, and on the part of the units, they are compelled to do it, and in most cases, they are successful. But on the departments, the owner or the department, the undertakings have to be honored in a more faster manner. I don't say that they are lethargic, but they move slightly slower, leading to the final performance of the units. A next level of performance monitoring and performance management is benchmarking. Here we have a serious problem. Most of our units operate below the economy scale of the plants of the world standards. They have a lower level of technology. With these conditions, it's very difficult to rate them along with modern manufacturing facilities in terms of essential parameters like specific energy consumptions, cost of production, or market realization. None of the units can influence either domestic market or transboundary markets. The solution lies in capacity buildup through expansion or diversification and also in upgrading technologies. Both the parties have to essentially contribute towards this. Management, much has been talked about in some of the presentations relating to the board quality and balanced board. Truly, it's very important. Professional management have to be placed. We do not have such kind of expertise in most of our operating units. A minimum of two or three full-time directors to lead finance operations are essential in most of the units. Succession planning is also almost not at all there in most of the units, and hence a second level leadership also is lacking in most of these units. In China, we have an example from China. In the CNOOC, which is the counterpart of our ONGC, they have a very professional kind of board in which two US organization leaders are there. They are from Shell and Goldman Sachs. The kind of professional expertise they gain from these units contribute to not only their domestic operations, but also give them an edge in their international operations. Regarding project management, this kind of strengthening of the performance is very, very important, especially we are a $2 trillion economy. growing at about 78%. And definitely we have to take mammoth projects. But the kind of project management experience we have is highly deplorable. We have the latest report from the Ministry of Statistics and Program Implementation. Of the 951 central sponsored projects, there is a huge loss of 76,000 crores in terms of cost and time overrun. We do not have a state level data. And our major 14 national projects, the time and cost overrun works out to 46,000 crores, which is more than twice the amount granted by the Reserve Bank of India during the recession to address the recession on account of the recent economic slowdown. So hence, a very professional kind of project management is essential. And in our state itself, our manufacturing operations, as we can see from the literature already circulated, is 2,200 crores with a profit of 240 crores. Such kind of a professional setup is indeed necessary and in place to lead our further scale operations at higher scales. An important aspect relating to improvement in the monitoring process itself can also be discussed. We must move to automated process monitoring, online performance monitoring, as some of the central public enterprises, it is in vogue in some of the central public sector undertakings. Day-to-day reporting and online performance monitoring are important. The environmental issues also need day-to-day caution and involvement of the top executives right on today, because the environmental issues gaining importance, and most of these industrial operations are being challenged with major issues on the environment front. Actually, as a part of the monitoring process, what I think is that we have to assess the environmental burden arising out of that unit and compare it from year to year, so that there are deliberate efforts to bring it down. And finally, a word on human resource. Human resource development is a very important factor. The leadership shall be left to people with that kind of proficiency, with adequate domain expertise. Unless such kind of leadership is available, this organizing and advancing further will be a major problem. The present kind of bureaucratic setup is lacking on several fronts, so we may have to consider other models, be it on the lines of the British Indian Management Pool, which later became the Indian Management Pool, or the Tata Administrative Service kind of thing, or other foreign entities like the ENI of Italy or ENA of France. Unless such things are strengthened in our further efforts to move forward and systems are perfected, then only this model can be taken to or can be replicated at the national level, so that the whole of the industrial operations become guided by this kind of professional expertise and achieve excellence in all fronts. Thank you.
I think every one of the 7 people who spoke today could probably have easily run a workshop session for an hour and a half, and I wish that was an opportunity that was available to everyone attending, because each one has been demonstrated an expert in their particular fields and demonstrated there's a commonality of the importance of SOEs to a nation's economy. I have to express a personal sympathy towards South Africa. I felt that your presentation was very familiar in the sense of you using some of the same governance tools and monitoring tools that we've learned to use as well. Michael, I felt, as always, was sage, wise and encouraging, and introduced one or two of the issues that we probably have overlooked for the last day and a half, that it's not just indicators, it's not just tools, it's judgment. And there have been a number of companies, and Michael mentioned the famous ones, of course, that have gone to the wall simply because they were hypnotised by the figures and didn't actually look outside the window. And indeed, there are court cases in Australia with regard to directors who didn't even go into their own own facilities to see how bad things were, but depended on management. John, I appreciated, Mr. John Samuel appreciated his bringing in corporate social responsibility. That's an evolving issue in a number of countries around the world, and I think in our own country we're somewhat slow to it, whereas I know in Britain and elsewhere they've got some tremendous examples on that. I have to confess I originally was a cynic about it, but I now understand its relevance to the bottom line. But John also produced a number of very interesting issues in regard to monitoring, as did Alexandra. He introduced a number of important tools. And I think when we look at both those gentlemen's transparencies, we'll take away quite a bit of advice on how to improve our own respective monitoring regimes. So I thank them both for that. And I've commented on Mrs. Lepoi's presentation, but I was particularly interested in her case study of Transnet and the efforts they've gone to develop their tools. One of the other speakers also talked about development, and I'm talking about director development, and I'm sorry, I forget which one it was, but that's something that's dear to my heart, is director development. Because I think the companies are only as good as the directors and the chief executives, and there are a number of jurisdictions where it's very difficult to find them. One of the assignments I'm doing for the World Bank, I've gone quite heavily into the fact of trying to develop local people to provide local solutions and local outcomes. As a consultant and rent seeker these days, I have to avoid being one of the speakers referred to someone coming in for 2 weeks, offering a few words and flying out again. I think it's most important for all of us to involve the people and the participants in each respective jurisdiction. I could go on but my organiser has permitted me as chair to invite 2 questions. So if you've got two of you have got burning issues you'd like to raise, could I ask you to raise questions now? And can I please ask you to keep it concise? I think the soup's getting cold or something, I'm not sure. Anyway, if there are questions, who's going to be first? I can't quite see with the light as it is now, but never mind. I think we've stunned them to silence, people. Well, without any more hesitation, I would like to personally thank all 7 people that have contributed to this session today. An important nuts and bolts session. Yesterday we talked about philosophy, the political will, political issues, and some of the Kerala success stories. Today, this session has introduced quite important work-face issues for all of us involved in corporate governance, involved in performance monitoring, and more importantly, involved in looking after our respective investments. So would you join with me in thanking our respective speakers and discussants? And if there's any change to the timetable, I'll defer to Padma.
So that brings us to the end of the morning session. We thank Mr. Ron Hamilton for chairing the session. We also thank all the speakers and the discussants. Ladies and gentlemen, your lunch is ready. You may please proceed to the opposite hall. Kindly reassemble at 3 p.m. sharp for the afternoon session. Thank you.
To come over here, if he is here by now. Well, okay. As we wait for the other discussant to join us, I have pleasure in introducing to you our discussants as well as the speakers this afternoon. We have with us Professor Ranjit Bandara, who you had already met. He is the chairman of the Sri Lanka Foundation, also senior economic advisor, a strategic enterprise management agency, and member of various prestigious institutes. Then we have Mr. Mumba Kapumpa. You can't miss him with his very distinguished dress and the shock of white hair from Zambia. He has been practicing law from 1972 and has worked in the public service for more than 30 years. was president of the Institute of Directors in Zambia, an eminent lawyer and member of the steering committee of the Pan-African Forum for Corporate Governance. Then we have Mr. Mahadevan, who we have the opportunity of meeting for the first time this afternoon in the two-day program, currently the Deputy Secretary General of the WEFTU and Deputy General Secretary of the AATUC as well. He was General Secretary of the HAL Employees Association, convener of the All India HAL Trade Unions Coordination Committee for 30 years, visited number of countries, presented number of papers. He is a master's from the Mysore University, apart from having graduated in electrical sciences. Amongst the discussants, we have with us for the first time again in the two-day conference, Mr. Sukomal Sen, a very long time and distinguished activist in the Indian trade union movement. He was associated with the All India State Government Employees Federation, was the vice president. He is the vice president of the C2. Mr. Sen works in the international sphere and has held several positions in the trade unions within the country as well as in internationally, including that of being a member of the Presidential Council of the WEFTO, and also he is a member of the Central Committee of the CPI Marxist and a member of the Parliament between 1982 to 1994. We have already met Mr. Alec Altoman, who has been working with the Hakma Institute of Corporate Governance in Dubai, and he doesn't need any more introduction, having been introduced already, and you know him very well. Ladies and gentlemen, we have also a challenge of keeping up to our time, having concluded the last session much later than we expected, but of course we have also some element of leeway because one or two of the speakers have already spoken, and we have slightly lesser number of discussants as well as the speakers this morning on this topic. Just to give a framework and very, very briefly so, and then recommending my speakers and discussants to keep up to our time discipline, let me say that this particular session has been introduced not only to be seen contemporary, because it is important that we address issues of corporate social responsibility, or its more inclusive term these days, which is the environment, social and governance policies, or the ESG policies of the SOEs. And it is also important that it has to be politically right to have these issues ingrained into state-owned enterprises, which primarily believe in promoting the welfare of the state, welfare of the public, and welfare of the workers and all its stakeholders. In dealing with this, we are particularly looking at not opinions, we are looking at how particular countries' experiences or particular company experiences have been represented amongst the discussants as well as the speakers in mainstreaming the concerns of the environment, social and governance into the corporate activities or the government policies. For your information, many countries have issued guidelines, recommended standards such as the compliance with the Global Compact, and including the Government of India, which has recently issued the guidelines on CSR, which I'm not commending because there are issues which don't necessarily meet everyone's approval. But nevertheless, there have been moves, specific and steady moves in terms of highlighting the environment, social governance issues and integrating them not only into the corporate agenda, but even in terms of the broader policy agenda as well as in ideological agendas as well. Now, when I turn to our speakers to kindly come and make their presentation here, may I request them to shorten this presentation in terms of making their main issues heard across in bullet points, probably in about 10 to 12 minutes each. And then I turn to my discussants and request them also to highlight the specific points that they may have arising from the presentations that have been made by the speakers, so that we may gain at the end at least 10-15 minutes to be able to give that time to the participants to raise issues and interact which we haven't had the opportunity to do so very well during the last 2 days of our program. I'll reserve my own observations to the end if I find any time left over. So may I invite Professor Ranjit Bandara to make his quick points, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Let me begin. As I briefly mentioned yesterday, Sri Lanka is now in the process of deprivatization of privatized public-owned enterprises. Therefore, there are so much that we could learn of the deprivatization of the privatized state-owned enterprises in Sri Lanka. This presentation, as Chairman requested, will be very brief. I have only 11 points to be presented. I'm not looking at my presentation as such, but of course I would make the highlights of it. However, it is my duty to inform you that this presentation is to show how Sri Lanka have reorganized its institutional structure in managing state-owned enterprises. Now, as you could see, Sri Lanka has a long history of having state-owned enterprises. It dates back 1920s. I must also indicate that Sri Lanka is also influenced by Indian ideology, Nehru's socialist ideology, and Mahalanobis's plan in 1950s. And the expansion of the state-owned enterprises was witnessed in 1950s due to the Industrial Corporation Act of 1957, in 1965 to 1970, due to availability of foreign aids for public investments and nationalization programs. From 1970 to 1977, the nationalization of the plantation and the Land Reform Acts of 1972 and 1975. However, by the end of 1985, by the time we began our privatization, we had about 284 public enterprises. It's quite a large number. These enterprises were contributed to the GDP by about 10 to 12%. In 1977, it was 15%. And you could see in Sri Lanka, most of the public enterprises are non-departmental organizations. And as you could see, you would find them in different forms, ranging from statutory bodies to companies with minority shareholders by the government. And also to facilitate the state-owned enterprises, there were a number of legislation being passed by the parliament. And one or two, as you could see, the State Industrial Corporation Act of 1957, Sri Lanka Trading Corporation Act number 33 of 1970, State Agriculture Corporation Act of number 11 of 1972, and there are quite a few. However, by the mid-1970s, as you could see, a number of agencies that involved in supporting Sri Lankan cause have raised the issue of managing state-owned enterprises. And this became more difficult with the introduction of liberalized economic policies in 1977. As a result, there was a decision by the Parliament that was appeared for the first time in the budget speech of 1986 that the state-owned enterprises should be privatized. As other countries in the world, Sri Lanka was also looking at the only possible option, that is to privatize the public-owned enterprises in mid-1980s. In 1987, as you could see, the two important legislation were enabled to support the privatization exercise. And the privatization of state-owned enterprises continued up to 2004, and there were a number of issues that were involved with the privatized state-owned enterprises, which have already been raised by a number of speakers last 2 days. Therefore, I am not going to look at what were the issues. However, towards the end of 2004, we were searching alternatives for privatization. And searching alternatives for privatization became mandatory in 2005 for the political victory of the present government. We began searching alternatives for privatization. As you could see, which is appeared in the red color, this was part of the budget speech of 2006. Government does not believe that the privatization is the only strategy for economic reforms. In fact, we will not privatize state-owned enterprises, but will be ownership, but will improve their performance through management reforms. Our enterprise reforms will be ownership neutral. All state-owned enterprises should bring in dividends income. At least they should not rely on the treasury for funding. Therefore, all state-owned enterprises will be required to enter into performance contract with the treasury. This is how we have begun. Now, as a result, there were a number of new institutional arrangement was set up. Department of Public Enterprise Management, Strategic Owned Enterprise Management, where I work, Ministry of State Resources and Enterprise Development, and the Company Act of 2007, and the Committee of Public Enterprises known as COPE. And here I have highlighted some of the main activities of this new institutional arrangement. The activities of Department of Public Enterprises, it's an apex body which ensure the good governance of public enterprises in Sri Lanka. And the SEMA, which is the special organization which was established as a statutory declaration of His Excellency, the President, with the power vested him by Article 33 of the Constitution. And this is quite similar to public sector restructuring and internal audit board here in Kerala.